Major Lindsay and Africa presents Bouncing Back, conversations about resilience for lawyers.
Welcome to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. This podcast is brought to you by Major Lindsay and Africa, the global leader in legal search and consulting. I'm your host, Rebecca Glatzer. I'm a managing director in the associate practice group at Major Lindsay and Africa. In this podcast, I'll speak to successful professionals about the hiccups, bumps, bruises, and setbacks they've experienced in their careers and personal lives, and how they ultimately bounce back from those experiences to thrive. Today, my guest is James Hahn. James is Senior Principal Counsel of Real Estate at Whole Foods Market. He and his team assist with the launching of new stores, ensuring that approximately 500 brick-and-mortar Whole Foods sites operate smoothly and serve as liaisons between landlords and Whole Foods. Prior to going in-house, James served as an associate in the New York office of Haynes & Boone, specializing in real estate finance. Prior to the start of his legal career, James worked at Morgan Stanley as an infrastructure analyst and as a broadcast analyst for Showtime Sports, specializing in mixed martial arts. James holds a BS in finance from Boston College, an MS in sports management from Columbia University, and a JD from Florida University School of Law. James, thank you for being here today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, get right into it. James, in a prior communication with me, you mentioned that you were laid off from your first job during the Great Recession in 2009. What happened?
Yeah, that was the first job I'd gotten out of college. It was the job that I thought I was supposed to have, the job that I went to school to get. And really, New York City was kind of the dream for me. So
Yeah.
after graduating in 2006, I had a degree in finance. I went into Morgan Stanley to work in investment banking. And that was kind of the goal at the time. But looking back, I realized it was probably one of the things that I should have thought about a little bit more. So much during that period of my life was kind of directed by family, friends. I was just playing the role of the successful college student who'd moved to New York and gotten a job on Wall Street.
Yes.
So 2006, I was in New York. I was enjoying the social aspect of living in New York, but professionally, there was always this feeling of, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? So when 2009 happened and the Great Recession kicked in, I was probably a sensible employee to be laid off because I wasn't quite passionate about the work.
Yes.
So that's where I ended up in 2009, along with a lot of other professionals in the finance industry. I found myself out of a job and, to a large extent, wondering what my next steps would be.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think a lot of us, even those of us sometimes, myself included, who went to law school straight out of undergrad, it's often like, well, this is what you do next if you're a poli-sci when you're because you're either a lawyer, a doctor, or in some cases an engineer. Those are the things to grasp for, or someone.
Yeah.
So it makes total sense to me. So what happened next? You were laid off and you're living in this very expensive city. What now?
So fortunately, I had some savings, not too much of it. And I spent the next year of my life basically just wandering around New York City, taking a hard look inwards to try to figure out who I was and what exactly it was that I was meant to do. And I will say during that time, it was challenging to watch all of my friends and people that I'd met professionally, because they all seemed to be doing well. It seemed like everyone had a purpose and a direction, and they never faltered, right? So for someone who gone to a pretty good school and gotten a pretty good job out of school, it felt like I was being left behind, and to see everyone kind of just rocketing past me was very frustrating. So I would say that the time when I got laid off, that was definitely the first major setback that I felt as an adult. And, you know, the next year was just I could best describe it as truly just like aimlessly wandering around New York, just partaking in the social aspects of New York to try to make myself feel better. But at the same time, I really was looking for something that just resonated with me,
Yeah.
because what I'd found at that time was that I really had never felt a sense of agency. I was a product of someone who had done what they were suggested that they do pretty well. And what
Yeah.
I mean by that was, my folks are first generation immigrants, and they had said, get a good education, go to a good school, and then get a good job that pays pretty well. And
Yeah.
that's what I did, but
Yeah.
I felt it ultimately very unfulfilling. So at that point, I felt as if I was a newborn, truly. It was a time of a lot of reflection and making decisions for myself, which it sounds ridiculous to say, but at age 26 felt like the first time I truly was able to make large decisions for myself based on who I was and what I thought was best for myself at the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that makes total sense. I can identify with that as well. Not graduating from law school, that was fun, and then entering into the profession is when I started myself to realize like this doesn't quite fit. I don't know that this is a good place for my talent. I don't know that this is going to make me happy in the long term. So it does
Yes.
make sense. It does make sense. And, there are societal impacts and parental impacts and all sometimes
Hmm.
go into things just because you need the money. And then
Yeah.
get to a place of safety, look up and go, oh my God, what have I done? This is not a good fit. This is not a good long term fit. So that makes complete and total sense. You mentioned that this journey led to getting into ultimately a broadcast analyst Showtime Sports role, which I think is pretty amazing. Did you have experience with mixed martial arts before, or how did that sort of come about?
Yeah. And this came probably about maybe like 9 months into my New York City walkabout adventure that I was having. I, I was near Madison Square Park, and I just distinctly remember this because this was one of the major inflection points in my life. But it was kind of dusk, and if you've ever been in New York City when the sun's kind of going down during the summer, you know that there is this like palpable electricity in the city as everybody winds down. People are going to dinner. The city seems to come to life after a long day of work. And I was walking near Madison Square Park and just thinking to myself, man, I'm so lucky to live here. Like I've gotta make this work. I know I can do something meaningful with my life. I just need to figure out what it is. And at the time, there was a gym above a Subway. As I was walking down the street, I think I don't remember, it was like 27th Street, 6th Avenue, or somewhere around there. I look up to the second floor of this building, and there are guys training there, and you can see them in the window. It's above a Subway. The sun's setting, so you have this like pinkish kind of hue. The sun's filtering through this street. It's almost like the universe is telling me to look up. Uh, and they're they're two guys, they're sparring, and it's such a weird sight to see in New York City. There are people running around in suits, and they're all going home from their professional jobs. They look very professional, and whatever attire it is that was required at their office place. And then there's these two guys just punching and kicking each other in the window on the second floor. And I'm just drawn to this. I can't take my eyes off it. So I walk across the street. I get buzzed in to the gym, and I walk up, and it's an MMA gym.
Oh, wow.
and I had no idea what they were doing. I boxed a little bit in college, so I understood that side of it. I was looking for something that kind of would fulfill that side of what I was looking for in terms of competition, just physical activity. But the other things that were going on in the gym, I didn't understand. There were people rolling, which is just a term used for like jujitsu. When you're practicing submission grappling, there were people in there training Muay Thai. And it was a moment where I decided, oh, this might be it. Let's get into this. So I started training at that gym, and it became very apparent very quickly that this was going to be an obsession. And I spent like 6 days a week, 5 hours a day, just living in a gym, just training, competing. Um, and I wanted to parlay that into a job, something that I thought I might be able to turn into a career. And that was really the first time I felt that I'd actually gotten a foothold after being laid off, where I thought I could maybe kind of catapult myself into something meaningful.
Yeah.
And it was a liberating feeling. It was almost as if I'd wandered for so long and I'd found something. I just didn't quite know how to translate that into something that would provide for me. How could I get a job doing this without being a professional fighter?
Yeah.
Um, and you know, I just constantly kept my eyes and ears open to try to meet people in the industry, to try to get my foot in the door somewhere. And after a few months, it just so happened someone in the gym was an editor for Showtime Sports doing specifically mixed martial arts editing.
Wow.
And on no uncertain terms, I went up to that person and I said, I I really would love to come in and meet your team and meet your boss, um, and just let him know that I'm there. And when I was able to get in the door, I essentially just said, "Hey, I'm here. I'm a college graduate. I've worked on Wall Street. I can learn very quickly, and I'm willing to work for free."
Wow.
And so they brought me on as an unpaid intern at age 27 when I was living in New York City. It's the type of thing you can only do when you're when you're single,
Yes.
um, and when you're single and young. And
Yeah.
so that's what I did.
Wow.
I took a job as an unpaid intern, working alongside people who were sometimes like 7, 8 years younger than me, and just doing the best I could to parlay that into a full-time paying job.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a great story, James. I mean, there's so many little nuggets for this. Before we get too far down this, I just, for myself and for our listening audience, tell us what mixed martial arts is and how it's different kinds of martial arts. Let's get that clarified.
Yeah, that's that. I take that for granted. I assume everyone knows what this is, but for those who are unfamiliar, if you've ever seen or heard of the UFC, that is the world's biggest promotion for mixed martial artists. There are others around the world. At the time, Strike Force was a big one, but essentially, mixed martial arts is it's a combat sports where you are allowed to fight standing up using boxing or Muay Thai, and then it also continues on the ground via striking and also Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so submission grappling. And it's a blending of a lot of different martial arts forms, and it started back in the mid 1990s as a way to find out which martial arts style was best, kind of like you would see in movies like Bloodsport. I mean, it had its roots in very kind of cinematic themes, like what fighter from what country using their kind of native fighting art, like who would be the best based on kind of their regional training. And people would come from around the world and compete in these tournaments, and then it became very popular, and then of course it became commercialized, and now it is one of the biggest sports in the world.
That's amazing. A great explanation. Thank you. I feel like I
Yeah.
understand. That makes great sense. I mean, your story I love so much because I feel like there's like so many themes here. I mean, one, it's sort of like listening to that inner voice, listening to the universe. It sounds kind of hokey, but sort of,
It does.
listening to what the universe it tells you, whether that's a spiritual thing, whether that's, listening to the little Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder, or just paying attention. And I think it was so wise of you to kind of slow down and just sort of spend some time with yourself and kind of, try to think through what might make sense based on your interests and skills. I identify with this story because when I was looking to get out of the practice of law and do something else and ultimately landed in recruiting, there was some of this for myself, kind of
Mm.
staring at LinkedIn, just scrolling to see what my other friends were doing, just like for hours.
Yeah.
And then taking walks around the block and thinking to myself, like, what are my skills? What do I like doing? A lot of us don't take the time to think through that. I speak at law schools all the time. I encourage, junior folks who are trying to find their way in the law to like think through where their talents might lie and what they like,
Yeah.
not just what sounds good, but
Mm.
what's good on paper, but where might your skills be appropriately displayed and used. So I just think it's an amazing story. And then I think, the other part that strikes me is your determination. There's some resilience there in saying, I love this, but a lot of people could come away from, doing mixed martial arts and say, there's no way for me to make a living out of this, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's a hobby or whatever. It's a way for me to,
Right.
right? And then also at the same time too, like your determinedness, your doggedness in, I will work for free, which I realize is a luxury that not everyone can afford, but
Yeah.
it's something that I think there's a lesson in that. Sometimes I talk to associates who don't like the practice area they're in and they want to be in a
Yeah.
different area. And sometimes I say to them, like, can you figure out a way where you're writing articles or learning about that other thing? Can you do
Mm.
work for another partner for free? Can you, figure out a way, weasel your way, if you will,
Yeah.
in doing some of this kind of work? Because that's the only way you're going to get the experience. And if you don't have the liberty to kind of hit the reset button and start again as a first year, you've got to sort of figure out a way to get some of these skills on the side as a hobby in your free time on the weekends. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to make that transition. So I think there's some really great lessons in your
Yeah.
story. And I love that you're like, willing to humble yourself and say, I'll start out with the first year journalism students or the, what have,
Yeah.
in order to get my
That
feet. That's
that was tough.
yeah, I'm sure it was very, very humbling. I'm curious, like, what kinds of activities you were doing as an intern and how that sort of ultimately led to kind of a paid position.
The job that I had was I was brought on as essentially a subject matter expert in mixed martial arts, both from a competitive kind of technical standpoint and also just because I was obsessive about learning about the mixed martial arts athletes that were competing in various promotions. So my job essentially at that point was very cool, which was I could travel to different events around the country and I would interview the athletes in the pre-fight meetings and come up with kind of help come up with color commentary alongside the other broadcasters in the booth. And on fight night, I would be at the broadcasting table. And I don't know if I still have these pictures, but my buddies would take pictures on when they would see me on TV and text it to me and say, "Hey, you're on TV." And I'm like trying to work, and they're texting me that I'm on TV, and it was just
I
it
love it.
was a it was a cool time. It was a very, very amazing part of my journey to get to where I am today. And you know, looking back, I never would have thought that that would be a stepping stone to where I ended up. And we can talk about this later, but you're right. There are a lot of lessons looking back, right? I think resilience is constantly an undercurrent. Discomfort is also a common theme to success, because I had never felt so uncomfortable with where I was, until after I'd kind of been untethered from the prescribed path. And that discomfort is ultimately, I think, how you accelerate growth, right? So once I embraced being uncomfortable, that's when I decided, like, I can do this. I can be an unpaid intern. I can use my savings. I can take on debt, but this opportunity needs to be vetted. Like, I need to see where this is going to lead, because I know in my heart that this is something that needs to happen. And I know in my heart that I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life if I don't take my shot.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that amen to all of that. And good for you, because I think it takes some incredible courage and faith
Yeah.
to you don't know what the future is going to.
No,
And you're like, well, let me put one foot in front of the other and see where this goes.
absolutely.
An incredible amount of guts, and I encourage people to do this more. It's hard to do with societal pressures, monetary
Mm.
pressures. I'm almost afraid to ask this question. What did your parents think of this? Dare I ask, when
Oh,
this was going on?
it turned into a lot of ignore calls from my parents because I knew what they were going to say, right? They were going to ask, are you getting paid? What are you doing? Did we send you to, like, SAT prep class for you to work for free? There was a lot of this, and I think that at the time I had to be very selfish because frankly, it seemed like, I know my folks would have believed in me. If you asked them, they would have said, of course we believe in our son. But at the time, it felt like the only person that believed in me was myself,
Yeah.
right? Because it didn't make sense. What I was doing made absolutely no sense. From a resume standpoint, it didn't make sense. From a professional standpoint, it didn't make sense. From just an age standpoint, right? It just didn't make sense that a 27-year-old would be working for free. Um, and and so that resiliency, that just I'm just gonna send it attitude was what got me through that period. And it worked out because I genuinely tried to just overperform at everything I did. And after like a few months of kind of like a trial internship period, I was brought in as a full-time broadcast analyst, and now I was traveling a lot. I was in California one weekend, I'd be in Nashville the next weekend. Um, and I thought that everything was going to work out. I
Yeah.
thought, man, is what was, like, all that time just kind of looking inwards and hurting and being humbled, was it all for this? Because if it was worth it.
Yeah.
And I felt like just it felt perfect. Like, I was so happy with who I was. I was so happy with what I'd accomplished. And then everything just came to an absolute screeching halt, and I was hit with arguably the biggest setback I've ever had in my life, just when everything was looking up.
Yeah. You've mentioned this previously to me. Tell us a little bit about what happened. You're in this dream job and it was cut short abruptly by
Yeah.
illness, it sounds like.
Yeah, it started at work. I was putting together a packet, for an upcoming fight, and the computer screen was kind of looking a little bit weird and hazy, and I just figured it was because I'd just been working too much. I've been looking at a computer screen, for too long. It's one of those things where something could be wrong, but if you really think about how wrong it could be, it starts scaring you a little bit. So you just put it off and you're like, it'll go away.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, and and so I went home, um, just didn't really think much more of it. I went to bed, and the next morning I woke up, got ready for work. I remember having a bowl of cereal, And I'm kind of swishing the cereal around in my mouth and realizing I can't taste anything on the right side of my tongue. If I kind of tilt my head to the left, I can taste the cereal. If I tilt my head to the right, I don't even I can barely feel anything. And so now I'm kind of thinking this is really bizarre. But again, if I thought too much of it, I was like, this is kind of scary. So I put my clothes on and went to work. And I'm working, and at a certain point, I'm like, I can't even read. I can't read. I can't see the letters on the screen right now. Everything looks like I'm underwater. So
Right now.
I go home and I take a nap, and then I wake up, and now the proverbial, it's hit the fan, right?
Yeah.
Like I am deteriorating really rapidly, and I have no idea what's going on. So I get my roommate, which Carlo, if you're listening, thank you so much, because he's like, we need to get you to the hospital. And I was like, I don't need to go to a hospital.
He's like,
You're,
no.
yeah,
Take it.
because he was a physical therapist, and I was like, is there a stretch I can do to like make me feel better? He's like, no, we need to get you to a
Not a stretch
hospital.
situation. My friends, no, this is a little more serious. I mean, that's cute, Jane. Come on, let's go. Oh, bless your roommate, God.
Yeah, so he drags me to the emergency room, and then we go to NYU, and immediately they're like, we need to get you i- into first we need to do a CAT scan, and we need to do a battery of tests. And they they're like, okay, we think you've had a stroke,
Oh my
so we
God.
need to take you to the stroke unit. So I get put in an intensive stroke unit, and the whole time, Rebecca, you know what I'm thinking? I need to get back to work.
Oh,
All this can't be for nothing. Please
yeah,
don't tell me. Please don't tell me all of this is for nothing.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just in the stroke unit. They call my parents, they call them in. They're like, this could be pretty serious. You should probably, you come see your son. And they're doing all these tests and they can't figure out what it is. So they've come to the conclusion that it's not a stroke, but the right side of my body is paralyzed and I can't walk. I've like utterly lost my ability to walk. So I'm kind of stumbling around. I have to get in a wheelchair to even go to the bathroom. I'm in a room with three other people who have had strokes, and when you go to a hospital, sometimes you're just like in a room and there's not a nurse around, and the nurse will come check on you once every like 5 hours to make sure you're okay, and a doctor will see you once a day.
Yes.
In this particular unit, there is a nurse assigned to you full time, and there is a nurse sitting at a desk next to your bed.
So
Um,
serious. It's like the intensive care unit or something of
yeah,
that nature. This is not just like come and go as you please and eat cookies and drink juice.
no, it is like it's about as as intimidating as an environment where you can be where you're supposed to get better, because it feels very serious, and you don't it's startling to be in an environment where even the doctors are kind of looking at you worried, right?
Yeah.
And so after about a week, they figure out that I have contracted this very rare autoimmune disease that you get through a virus, and it's so rare that they actually don't know how you contract it. They don't know like how this disease works to get into your body. But fortunately, once they diagnose it, the 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 treatment for it is very clear cut, and people rarely die from this, but a lot of people do have kind of material neurological implications after you're all said and done and you leave the hospital.
Oh,
And for me, that was I had to learn how to walk again. So here I am, a healthy person who'd been a very active competitor in jiu-jitsu, and I'm in a hospital gown, like learning how to walk using a railing with my dad holding my hand.
man.
Yeah, and to talk about setbacks, to talk about resilience, I mean, I wasn't really thinking about anything at that point but just surviving, because it felt like nothing was ever going to get better.
Yeah.
And um y- learning how to walk again. It was, you talk about putting one foot in front of the other. It's literally what I did for
Yeah.
a few weeks. I would look down at my feet, willing my feet to just like make forward progress. Like, come on, we can do this. Uh, and that's how I spent the next month and a half in
Wow.
the stroke unit of a hospital, just trying to get myself to a place where I could function autonomously again. And this is all after what I thought was going to be one of the bigger setbacks in my life. And then there was that like movie like journey to self-discovery, and then what seems like fate intervening, and then the success. But I was just hit again, even harder than the first time.
Yeah, because you were doing something you loved and you thought, this is it. This is it. This is my career.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
and fighting so hard for it. I mean, that's got to be. I could see how someone could get really, really depressed, from that kind of
Yeah.
experience. You know, I'm curious kind of how you managed to come out of that. 'Cause I could just, I'm imagining that it took you many probably weeks and months to get back to your body to get to a place where you're functioning in a way that even close to where you had before. How
Yeah.
long did you to get out of the hospital and to be able to walk again and sort of regain some of that functionality where you're starting to feel a little bit more like yourself?
So it was 2 months in the hospital, and then I was discharged. And to be completely honest, I've never fully regained that level of athleticism I had prior. My body just kind of doesn't respond as quickly as it used to. And I think that's just partially the nerve damage that happened
Yeah.
from that virus. Um, but I was very fortunate because while I walked out of that room, most people in that room, they weren't going to make a recovery similar to the one that I did. And, I think a lot of the strength I would draw was I felt like I truly just had another chance, right? I had another chance to go out and really I felt reborn almost. I don't this sounds really cheesy, but it was just like, all right, let's start clean slate. You've got another chance. You're extremely fortunate to be able to walk out of this hospital. Let's make the most of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was
Yeah, this idea that it could be a lot different. The outcome could have been a lot different.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's funny because when I was in the hospital, I had so much time to do nothing because I couldn't get out of the bed, and there's only so much TV you can watch, and I had these LSAT books just in my room because at one point a long time ago I thought that a long time ago meaning right after I graduated college, I thought maybe it'd be nice to go to law school. So I had these LSAT prep books, and they just collected dust on a shelf, and I asked my roommate to bring me just some books so I could read, and the LSAT book was one of those books.
That's so
And
funny.
so I just started kind of taking practice tests because it was a great way to pass the time, and also it was so painful that I forgot about my own misery in the hospital.
I love it. I'm also thinking about your roommate. I'm like, the roommate, this is gonna be a fun thing to like, I know what I'll bring James instead of like some cool like magazines. I'll bring an LSAT. That tickles me. Huh, this roommate keeps on giving.
Yeah,
So
good
that's so
dude.
funny. So yeah, you're like, let's pass the time by engaging my brain and trying to forget what's going on. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. And
exactly. And
how did that lead to actually taking the LSAT and going to law school?
well, the LSAT became kind of my next obsessive challenge. If you can't tell, when I get into something, I tend to be very obsessive about things. And it was it was my thing in the hospital. I just wanted to score. I just wanted to increase my scores. I just wanted to do better because I didn't have much else to do, and I wanted to see how good I could be at this, at taking this particular test. And then that was kind of launched me into learning more about what potential career paths could be. And the more I read about the practice of law, and all of the various potential practice areas I could go into, I thought this would be a nice springboard, right? Like maybe I don't know exactly what I want to do with this law degree, but I could definitely do something, and I could think I could do this long term. So I took the LSAT and I enrolled at Fordham, and that was that. And really, there's more that happens afterwards, but another large inflection point, and I think that the myth of lawyers is that they're calculated, they know what they're doing, and as
Hmm.
you can tell by my story, like some of this stuff is just trust your gut and send it,
Yeah.
right?
Give it
But
a try. Give it a whirl.
yeah, but I would just qualify that by saying trust your gut, give it a whirl, but absolutely give it the best effort you possibly can, because if you just kind of heartedly do this, then there's just no point, right?
That's right.
You're just not going to realize
Yeah.
what could have been unless you really just send it.
Totally. Yeah. No, that makes complete and total sense to me. I felt that way when I got into recruiting. I think for a long while I
Mm,
had one toe. I stayed active, like I kept my
yeah.
licensure active because I want, in case of emergency, break glass. And
Hmm.
funny because the minute I sort of gave that up and was like, this is what I'm doing, and I need to be like whole hog, like both feet, let's go.
Yeah.
I flourished. And I think that's a really additional good lesson, which is like if you're gonna bother to try something, you really should put forth the effort. Um,
Hmm.
because you won't really know if you're going to be successful unless you go, full bore, like at it. That will let you know if it makes sense and it is a good fit. Kind of just dipping your toe can may not heed the same kind of results, and I think that makes a really good point and lesson for our listeners. Well, I could talk to you about this all day, James, and so
Yeah.
for time's sake, I'm gonna limit it to two more questions.
Sure.
There's so many lessons I'm taking
Hmm.
from your experience. I'm sure there's plenty that you have taken. I'm curious how that sort of windy road and non-linear
Mm.
path impacts your work today and what you do at Whole Foods and how you think about your career and how you know, act in
Hmm.
your current role. What sort of impacts has that entire experience had on you today?
That's a really good question. I think it's tough to pinpoint exactly what from that experience has shaped me as an attorney. I think in the aggregate, I will say that that time essentially relearning how to do something that was so basic, was so humbling that it taught me try not to be antagonistic with your colleagues, because there's just nothing's nothing's guaranteed. Um, Folks are always going to be going through something when they're, even if you're negotiating against them, or if they're a counterparty, things get a little bit heated. People are always dealing with their own things, right? Like
That's right.
sometimes I'm at work and I do feel kind of the effects of my time in the hospital, meaning that I seem to get kind of tired a little bit easier, and you would never know this, right? If you're negotiating against me, sometimes I'm a little bit short, but that has nothing to do with what my counterparties are doing. It's just that I'm just kind of going through something, and I try to remember that, and I try to be very cordial and work with people and try to maintain relationships rather than being the antagonistic attorney on the other side.
Yeah, yeah, the sort of
Um,
scorched
it,
stereotypical.
yeah, and
Yeah,
I will say that it's made my job a lot more enjoyable. I think the path to success is a little bit easier when you do that. And I mean, what's the downside of having people who respect you and appreciate you rather than being the person that people would rather not work with,
Exactly.
right? So
Exactly.
it's just a little bit of humility and a little bit more of just reminding yourself that just be mindful that we're all humans trying to make
Yeah.
a living, and we've chosen a very difficult profession where perfection is expected. And to the extent that we can help one another out, I see no downside to that.
No, not at all. I totally agree. And I think that's a great piece of advice as well. You never know what sort of battles people
Yeah.
are. That's a great nugget. Well, the past few years, as you know, James, have been extremely difficult for everyone. COVID, due to world events, due to the sort of tumult we're seeing in our own legal industry. What advice would you give newly minted attorneys who may not have experienced this kind of tumult in their professional and personal lives before?
Rebecca, you're just asking a bunch of really good questions.
I'm
I hope
trying
my
to do my
answers
job.
can be.
I'm trying,
I
Jay.
hope,
Trying.
I hope my answers can be as pointed and as insightful. So, if I could crystallize the things that we've talked about, I would say with my very first setback of being laid off and wandering for a year, lesson one there is be patient. It's so hard to be patient when your job and your livelihood is on the line. But don't jump at the first things, because I certainly had opportunities to do things that wouldn't have really progressed my life and my career forward, but that were available. And I chose to wait. And, that paid off handsomely. So that would be lesson one from the first setback. Lesson two that I always take with me is from my time in the hospital, that I think there is an overemphasis on constantly looking towards the horizon and trying to understand and divine what's meant much further on down the line. But sometimes it's okay to just look down at your feet and make sure you're putting one foot in front of the other. Because forward progress is forward progress, right? And for me, I felt at times that I wasn't meant to jump. Sometimes I was just kind of in a place where I needed to take baby steps. And that's okay. And that's totally fine. And kind of this move in-house, I would say, and this is probably something that maybe some people can find comfort in, is that don't buy into this myth that attorneys necessarily have to compromise and that attorneys are inherently unhappy in their jobs because the nature of the work makes you unhappy. I can tell you right now that I have never been so satisfied and fulfilled in my professional career. I love coming into work. That sounds like a lie. It is not. I love my team. I love the substance of the work. I love my clients. It's there. It can be there for anyone who's struggling and wondering if there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I promise you, it's a possibility. You're hearing from one of them. And I at times wondered if there was ever kind of a practice within law that could provide you with such happiness. But don't lose hope. Be patient, take baby steps when you need to, and just understand that there's something that could be a perfect fit.
I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. For anyone junior or senior who's in this profession.
Mhm.
James, thank you so much for giving me your time and being so open and honest.
Yeah.
Me and our listeners today. I got a lot out of this. I know that anyone listening to this conversation will get a lot out of it, and I sincerely appreciate your time.
Yeah, Rebecca, always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you for listening to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. Join us next time for another story about thriving after overcoming challenges. You can find Bouncing Back and other programming for lawyers on MLA's Legal Talk Network.